In those days there was no king in Israel. Each person did what they thought to be right. This morning my devotional reading was Judges 19 to 21. Even though I've read this passage 30 times, it never gets any easier. I find it to be the most disturbing narrative in Scripture. I never quite knew how to process it before, but in December I visited Community Bible Church, and Pastor Burkholder preached on this passage. I don't recall ever hearing a sermon about this before, and for good reason. It is not a feel-good message. The first verse reminds the people, in those days when there was no king in Israel. Judges 17:6 also relates, in those days there was no king in Israel. Each person did what they thought to be right. It's as though the people are being told that our hearts are bent toward wickedness when we are left to our own devices. And surely they are. So in these days in Israel, there was a certain Levite living as an immigrant in the far corners of the Ephraim highlands. He married a secondary wife from Bethlehem in Judah. In an act of unfaithfulness toward him, his secondary wife left him and went back to her father's household at Bethlehem in Judah. She stayed there 4 full months. Then her husband set out after her to convince her to come back. The woman was considered unfaithful because she left her husband and went back to her family. The story doesn't tell this, but I think we can assume from the rest of the story that the woman felt disrespected or unsafe with her husband, so she left. There was dysfunction in the home. Why do I come to this conclusion? Because of his treatment of her in the rest of the passage. The Levite, who was from the priestly tribe of Israel, was able to retrieve his wife after her father detained him for several days. He left late in the evening because he was unwilling to stay another night. They journeyed until they reached the Israelite town of Gibeah, because he felt it would be safer to stay with his own people rather than among foreigners. An old man saw him in the square waiting for shelter and brought him home. This is where the story gets disturbing and graphic. Judges 19:22 reads, while they were relaxing, suddenly the men of the city, a perverse bunch, surrounded the house and started pounding on the door. They said to the old man, the owner of the house, send out the man who came to your house so we can have sex with him. Pastor Burkholder shared that we are similar to the worthless men of Gibeah in that we look to satisfy our sexual lusts and desire in ways that dishonor God and hurt others. The story goes on to say, the owner of the house went outside and said to them, no, my friends, please don't commit such an evil act, given that this man has come to my home as a guest. Don't do this disgraceful thing. Here's my daughter, the young woman, and his secondary wife. Let me send them out, and you can abuse them and do whatever you want to them. But don't do such a disgraceful thing to this man. But the men refused to listen to him. So the Levite grabbed his secondary wife and sent her outside to them. I've read this passage in other versions, and they weren't quite as clear as to who sent the woman out. To make it less distressing, I tried to convince myself that it was the old man with less of a connection to the woman than that sent her out to be tortured. This was not the case. It was clearly her own husband. In addition, the fact that the old man was willing to submit his own daughter to the abuse of the people to protect a stranger is unconscionable. The Levite chose self-preservation instead of doing what was right, which we have been doing since Adam blamed Eve and Eve blamed the serpent in the Garden of Eden. The right thing to do would be to stand against the mob and try to protect the people within the house. The passage goes on to say that the perverted men raped her and abused her all night long until morning. They finally let her go as dawn was breaking. At daybreak, the woman came and collapsed at the door of the man's house where her husband was staying, where she lay until it was daylight. When her husband got up in the morning, he opened the doors of the house and went outside to set out on his journey. And there was his secondary wife, lying at the entrance of the house with her hands clutching the door frame. Get up, he said to her, let's go. There was no response. So he laid her across a donkey, and the man set out for home. When he got home, he picked up a knife, took his secondary wife, and chopped her, limb by limb, into 12 pieces. Then he sent them into all the areas of Israel. Rather than showing any remorse or compassion for his wife that had been brutally murdered, the Levite's only concern was revenge. He hoped to incite the Israelites against their brothers, the Benjaminites. And he was successful. Slaughter and genocide occurred as a result. This is how the Levite related the story to the Israelites when they inquired, "Tell us how this evil act happened." So the Levite, the husband of the murdered woman, answered, "My secondary wife and I came to Gibeah of Benjamin to spend the night, and the leading citizens of Gibeah tried to attack me. They surrounded me in the house at night and were determined to kill me. They abused my secondary wife until she died. I took her, chopped her up, and sent her pieces into every part of Israel's territory because they had committed a disgraceful act in Israel. All you Israelites, say what you think should be done here and now." The Levite failed to tell the whole story or the whole truth. He failed to relate that because of his cowardice and selfishness, he threw his wife out to the wolves to be tortured while he slept safely as a guest in the home of the old man. He blamed the people of Gibeah and saw himself as a victim. He was unwilling to admit to his culpability in the offense. In Judges 20:12-14, we learn that the Israelites tried to bring about justice. It says, "The Israelite tribe sent men throughout the whole tribe of Benjamin with this message: 'What about this evil act that happened among you? Now hand over those perverse men in Gibeah so that we can execute them and remove the evil from Israel.' But the Benjaminites refused to comply with the demand of their own relatives, the Israelites. Instead, the Benjaminites from all the cities came together at Gibeah to march out for battle against the Israelites." Pastor Burkholder shared that we are like the Benjaminites in that we choose loyalty in relationships over doing what is right. As a result of this event, over 40,000 Israelites died in their pursuit of vengeance against the Benjaminites. Over 25,000 Benjaminite soldiers were killed, and a genocide occurred where all the people in the towns of Benjamin were slaughtered, including women and children. Only 600 men survived. Then the Israelites felt remorse for wiping their brothers out, but they had made a promise not to give any of their daughters to these men as wives. Pastor Burkholder shared that we are like the Israelites in that we scheme and rationalize to get what we want. Rather than repenting of their rash words and providing wives for the Benjaminites, they exterminated another Israelite town so they could give the Benjaminites the virgins from that town. Because there were only 400, they then schemed and had the Benjaminites kidnap additional girls during the festival in Shiloh so that all the men could have wives. The Israelites believed that their pledge was more important than justice and righteousness. Think about the ways your heart is like the people in the story. What is God trying to tell you about your own heart? Don't cast aside his gentle voice. Jesus commanded us to love God and love others, and that sums up the 10 Commandment law. Are there idols that you have put before God, such as making an idol of yourself or something else? Have you dishonored God? Are you resting in God? Are you honoring your parents? Are you choosing to love and not hate? Are you keeping your mind pure of sexual sins? Have you stolen or lied about your neighbor or coveted your neighbor's spouse or property? Do what you need to do to get right before God and others. Now is the time of God's favor. Now is the day of salvation.